are military analytics. A small event in one part of the world can lead to big events in another. This is called the butterfly effect. Even the flapping of a butterfly's wings can affect many things, especially in times of crisis. Such effects increase. The war between Russia and Ukraine also affected the whole world. But for some countries, the impact was too great. This led to more countries intervening in the war. Turkey is one of the countries most affected by this war. Turkey has been doing many things for a long time to end this war. But Turkey's latest move has backed Russia into a corner. Kremlin leaders are in a big panic. European leaders are talking about this move. Now, the course of the war may change completely. Turkey is one of the countries most affected by the war between Russia and Ukraine. So why is Turkey so affected by this war? Turkey, an important member of NATO, is located south of Russia. Therefore, it also has commercial and political relations with Russia, considered as the continuation of the Ottoman Empire. Turkey has historically pursued a special policy in this regard. According to this policy, which is called the policy of balance in Turkey, Turkey aims to establish a balanced relationship with both Russia and NATO. In this way, it aims to resolve the crisis between the two blocs. NATO has always supported this policy of Turkey. All official talks between Russia and Ukraine are taking place in Turkey. The Turkish government brings together representatives of the two countries, especially for prisoner swap agreements. The most important agreements since the beginning of this war was the grain agreement. As you know, the grain shipped from the Ukrainian ports all over the world was very important for food production. If the grain ships could not sail because of the war, it would lead to a food crisis all over the world. The Turkish government put pressure on Russia on this issue. Representatives of the two countries met in Turkey and a grain agreement was signed. In this way, the food crisis was solved. Turkey's move disrupted Russia's plans. Turkey also has the power to influence this war due to its geographical location. Russia and Ukraine have many ports in the Black Sea. Russia was planning to use these ports to bomb Ukraine. However, for these ships to reach the Black Sea, they need to pass through the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. Turkey does not allow Russian warships to pass through these straits. This completely disrupts Russia's attack plans. The Russian army cannot use its navy in this war. Why is Turkey intervening so much in this war? Why is Russia helpless against Turkey? As you know, millions of Russian citizens have been fleeing their country since the beginning of the war. The vast majority of Russians fleeing their country are migrating to Turkey. For many years, Russians preferred Turkey's coastal cities for vacation. After the start of the war, Russian citizens started to live in these regions in Turkey. This huge influx of migration is causing many crises in Turkey. Turkey has been hosting millions of Syrian refugees for many years. After this war, a housing crisis began to emerge as a result of the arrival of Russian citizens to the country. As a result of this massive migration, the number of houses and touristic areas became insufficient. This led to an increase in housing prices. People living in these cities cannot pay the rent prices and therefore react to the government. The Turkish government wants to solve this crisis as soon as possible. On the other hand, there was a strong agricultural trade between Turkey and Russia. Hundreds of products produced in Turkey, such as tomatoes and corn, were sold to Russia. This war changed the trade relations between Russia and Turkey. As a result, the Turkish economy was badly affected. The Turkish government wants this war to end in order to re-establish trade relations with Russia. The most important thing Turkey is doing to end this war is by rotor drones. These drones are produced in Turkey and sent to Ukraine. By using these drones, the Ukrainian army has a great military superiority over Russia. These drones are considered to be the most powerful drones in the world. The Ukrainian army uses these drones to track all movements of the Russian army. The bombs carried by the drones are supported by artificial intelligence programs. These bombs cause great damage to the Russian army, especially Russian tanks can never escape from these drones. Thanks to these drones used by the Ukrainian army, most of Russia's ground operations are prevented. Thanks to these drones, the Ukrainian army has managed to destroy thousands of Russian tanks. There are also continuous operations against Russian trenches. The drones can drop bombs very precisely on the target. Ukrainian soldiers use these drones to bomb the inside of Russian trenches. Russian soldiers cannot hide in the trenches. The Russian army cannot do anything against these drones. Russian commanders reported this situation to Putin. Putin got very angry and wanted to buy drones from Turkey, but the Turkish government did not allow the sale of drones to Russia. Russia then bought Iranian drones, but they were not powerful enough. The Russian army suffered a heavy defeat in drone competition. Turkey's latest move could end Russia for good. The Turkish government has announced a special project. This project is actually a special military ship. This ship, the largest ship of the Turkish Navy, has an interesting feature. This ship, named TCG Anadolu, became the world's first armed unmanned aerial vehicle ship thanks to the runway on this ship. A new center was created for drones to fly and refuel. This 231-meter-long military ship is considered one of the most special military ships in the world. TCG Anadolu is currently based in Istanbul. The people of Turkey are visiting this ship and journalists from all over the world are examining it. The Turkish government is publicizing this new project, but the Russian government has begun to experience a great fear because of this ship. So why is this ship scaring Russia? As you know, drones are very important in the war between Russia and Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian army cannot reach everywhere in Russia using these drones. This ship, named TCG Anadolu, can make an important contribution to the Ukrainian army in this regard. Some experts say that this ship will be sent to areas close to Russian ports in the Black Sea. The Ukrainian army can expand drone operations using this ship. The Ukrainian army can organize very important operations against Russia using this ship. The Russian army could not do anything against drone operations. The fact that Turkey is a member of NATO also increases the importance of this ship. All of Turkey's weapon systems are integrated with NATO. TCG Anadolu can also make a great contribution to NATO's operations. Turkey has shown the whole world that it is an indispensable member of NATO. What do you think about these Turkish moves? How do you think these Turkish moves will affect the course of the war? What do you think about the TCG Anadolu, a drone ship produced in Turkey? Ukrainian forces have completely changed the structure of the Russian army, which has been going on for years. The Russian army, which is called a superpower, could not achieve any decisive victory over the Ukrainian forces. According to Vladimir Putin's calculations, the Russian army would capture Kiev and end the war within a week from the start of the war. However, we see that Putin's calculation did not materialize, and the war has been going on for 15 months unless the Russian forces were successful against the Ukrainian defense. The Russian leader sought the source of the problem in the generals. As you know, the Russian leader reduced the duties of the generals in the armed forces of the Russian Federation and connected the Russian army in Donetsk and Luhansk to the Chechen and Wagner forces. In this way, the Russian military was humiliated by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Many experienced Russian commanders in the Russian armed forces have been dismissed by order of Russian President Putin. It is known that these commanders had opposing views with the Russian leader about the current situation on the battlefield. As you can see, Putin wants to feel good by listening to lies and stories of atrocities about the war. The great conflict between the Russian leader who had no realistic goals and the Russian generals who conveyed the facts inflicted the greatest damage on the Russian army. The Russian Defense Ministry has declared that Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov is now at the head of the Russian forces fighting in Ukraine. Gerasimov took over from General Sergei Surovikin, who had been appointed just 3 months earlier. Surovikin was demoted to Gerasimov's deputy. Surovikin was considered by both Russian and Ukrainian warriors to be one of the most important and competent commanders of the Russian forces. It is thought that the event that was effective in Russian leader Vladimir Putin's decision to reshuffle was the withdrawal of Russian forces from Kherson and the loss of hundreds of soldiers in a barracks outside Makiivka. Surovikin saw it as a harmful decision to keep the city of Kherson occupied by Russian forces and held an important meeting with Putin and Russian Defense Minister Shoigu for the withdrawal of Russian forces from the region. Although Putin wanted Russian forces to retain control of the city, Surovikin managed to persuade Putin and Shoigu. Although Surovikin stated that he had successfully withdrawn the Russian forces, this move was not considered a success for Surovikin. Ukrainian forces carried out a missile attack on a barracks outside Makiivka in which they neutralized hundreds of Russian reservists. This was not Sorokin's direct responsibility, but rather a symptom of the incompetence of a corps of Russian officers who could not come to terms with the range and precision of the Ukrainian artillery. Still, Putin wanted a scapegoat, and that was Sorokin. In many ways, this event illustrates the extent to which the Russian war has been defined and distorted by politics. The Russian leader, as if punishing the most important commander of the Russian armed forces, appointed the chief of the general staff to the head of the army and demoted Surovikin to the second-man position. Putin awarded Surovikin the title of Joint Forces Commander. Despite this, it never gave the political support Surovikin needed to allow Putin to use all the different elements under his command as a single unified force. Surovikin had no control over the personal troops of Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov and, above all, the Wagner mercenary army under the command of businessman Yevgeny Prigozhin. There are close friends around Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the community that says yes to everything Putin says. Encouraged by this community, Putin seems to have convinced them instantly that he is a transformative leader. Everything that goes right is presented as Putin's success, while what goes wrong is served as the failure of generals in the Russian armed forces. This situation demoralizes the generals too much and causes them to take a reluctant attitude about the war in Ukraine. The people who were influential in the Russian leader's evolution into this mentality are Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov and Wagner financier Yevgeny Prigozhin, who also caused Surovikin's dismissal. Prigozhin and Kadyrov's efforts to be close to the Russian leader greatly affected those within the Russian armed forces and the Russian Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin and Kadyrov even targeted Russian Defense Minister Shoigu in their statement. It seems that Kadyrov and Prigozhin got the authority they wanted from Putin, and their responsibilities on the battlefield increased. In this case, the Russian armed forces lost. These events do not only mean falling in rank for Surovikin, the chief of staff. Gerasimov was relegated to a field role. This is very unusual and not appreciated very much. Although the appointment of Gerasimov serves as a way to improve coordination, things will continue on the field. As long as Putin is not willing to distance himself from Kadyrov or Prigozhin. Prigozhin, who has repeatedly sought to humiliate the armed forces of Russia, has already openly expressed contempt for Gerasimov. If the Kremlin does not impose sanctions on these two groups, Gerasimov's presence on the ground will mean nothing. If the Russian leader imposes sanctions or imposes on these two groups, the warlords who act as the engine for the Russian forces in the war in Ukraine may end their support for the Kremlin's invasion efforts in Ukraine. The Kremlin has long been preparing to launch new offensives using 150,000 mobilized reserves behind the lines earlier this year. This plan has been on the Kremlin's agenda for a long time. This significant military manpower of the Russian forces, the navy of the Ukrainian forces with the weapons supplied from the West, and the ineffective and low morale of the Russian generals reduces the possibility of the Kremlin to make permanent and important gains. It's not known how long Gerasimov, who was appointed head of the Russian army by Putin, will serve at the head of the armed forces as long as Gerasimov continues to meet Putin's high hopes. Putin will not dismiss him. If Putin doesn't get what he wants, he can quickly dismiss Gerasimov, the former chief of staff. There are many rumors about how the war will continue. Russia continues to make threats that it may use tactical nuclear weapons. These threats are far from the truth. Rather, Moscow's attempt to pressure Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to join the war, or that Russia's forces will be further expanded through a new wave of mobilization or conscription, are more realistic possibilities. Lukashenko is clearly very reluctant to get directly involved. A new mobilization or the deployment of hitherto largely non-fighting conscripts would not give the Russian forces any benefit. The newly recruited or sent to the frontline soldiers will cause tension in the face of the attacks of the Ukrainian forces. While Putin is managing the gradual militarization of Russian society and economy, he is also clearly aware of the potential risks to a regime whose legitimacy is in decline. Indeed, one of the reasons behind Surovikin's demotion was to try to use him as a scapegoat for recent flashbacks. Whatever the Kremlin government does, unless it reduces the political burden on Gerasimov, the massive military manpower in the Russian armed forces will not be able to exert its influence. Problems at the general level in the Russian forces could pose major problems for the Kremlin government in the coming days. 80% of the Russian people oppose the Kremlin government because of the war in Ukraine. If the Kremlin, which has lost the support of the people, loses the support of the army, a great chaos will occur in the Russian lands together with the difficulties brought by the war. The chaos that will occur in Russia will become an inextricable situation for the Kremlin government. If Putin takes ownership of all the successes and the failures continue to look for culprits, he will soon find no one to blame. That's when the Russian people will see who is the real culprit, and the Russian leader's reign, which has lasted for more than 20 years, will come to an end.